Coach, can I ask you who has really impressed you over the fall season? I mean, obviously you've not got to look at everybody yet, but which of the teams you've come up against have made an impression on you in the fall?
Well, interestingly enough, BYU, we played them in the finals of the Big 12 match play. Bruce Brockbank always puts a competitive team out there, but I think they're a little different this year than they've ever been. They've got some guys that hit it absolute miles. They're really competitive. So I think they're kind of a sleeper, if you will. I'm been very impressed with what Ryan Hibble's done at the University of Oklahoma. You know, seems like he just keeps reloading. He just keeps getting guys that fit his sort of coaching style, and I think they've done an amazing job. Alan Bratton at Oklahoma State kind of had a couple of transfers, has done a great job, and just landed right back on his feet, which is great. I think those are three of the teams that maybe we see a lot that I've been pretty impressed with, and with what they've been doing. I'm sure there's some others that I'm not thinking of right now, but right now our focus is going to be to figure out how to go out. There's 24 teams at the Prestige. How to figure out how to beat 23 really good teams.
Who are you looking forward to seeing, Coach, on your travels this spring?
I haven't seen Ryan Blagg's team at Louisville. Ryan coached with me here at Baylor for 6 years. This is probably the best team he's coached at Louisville, and he's got a great kid from Texas named Sebastian Moss, who's going to be an All-American, it looks like. And I really, really am looking forward to seeing what the Cardinals look like this year. Ryan and I talk often, so I've kind of got an idea what they look like. But he's a fantastic coach, and his guys are well coached. So I think that'll be a team, and they'll be at the Prestige. So we look forward to seeing them there.
Maybe on the individual side, I think for a lot of people at the moment, David Ford has been, probably the most outstanding player. I know he's second in the ranking, I believe, right now. How deep is the talent? Maybe we don't have to focus specifically on David Ford, but there seems to be 10, 15, 20 individuals maybe in the past 3 or 4 years where you're like, all of these guys could be studs on the PGA Tour. Maybe, and again, you coached at Oklahoma State. You saw a lot of really good players that had really good professional careers. What maybe do you see maybe in this generation of golfers that may be different, same? Are there different challenges? What's that like now?
Well, the different challenges are all the different parts about the collegiate model that have changed. So that's a big challenge. But one of the parts of that collegiate model on the golf side that's changed is the PGA Tour University, which I think has kept kids in college longer. Some kids who might, build their program, and by the time they're a junior, have played great and they're an All-American, they turn pro. Well, they turned pro with no status back in the day. Now, if they stay that extra year, go ahead and work on getting their degree. If not get it, certainly get closer. And then they're ready with status to go on to the Korn Ferry Tour at least. So I think that's been a big difference right there, is kids see a pathway to the PGA Tour that's better than just playing Monday qualifiers all summer and then going to tour school after you graduate or after you turn pro early, which I've never loved that. But if some kids are ready, they're ready. Ricky Fowler was certainly ready, and he got his card right away. But I think the PGA Tour University has kept kids competitive longer and kept them staying at their university longer. So I think the talent level on teams is bigger because not as many kids are turning pro early. I love the PGA Tour University model. I think it's fantastic. Not only kids getting degrees, but coaches are able to keep some kids for 4 years that they wouldn't be otherwise. So it's definitely the deepest the talent's ever been in the collegiate world. David Ford's just another example of a great player, but there's been so many in recent years.
Coach, you mentioned Louisville as a potential sleeper pick. They're currently ranked 33 coming into spring. Who would you pick as your sleepers, maybe below that level of, the players that perhaps get most of the attention?
It's kind of hard for me I haven't been looking on that. I've been trying to figure out which Baylor sleeper we're going to have that might break through this spring and play well. So I really probably don't have an answer there, but there are a lot of, the talent level in college golf is probably as deep as it's ever been. As we noted earlier, it's great. So I think we'll just see how the spring develops. But there's a lot of guys that aren't sleepers, like Jackson Coyven and David Ford and several others that are just amazingly talented. But I don't know. I'd have to give that one some more thought.
Yeah, you kind of look at, I'm looking at the rankings right now, and again, rankings aren't necessarily everything, but guy you just mentioned, Sebastian Moss at Louisville, is number 9. And then you get some kids outside of the traditional Power Fives, if you will, like a Kieran Van Wyck, who's at Charleston, I believe, Jake Peacock at South Florida. There's plenty of talent all around. You got Sergio Jimenez at Utah, right? So like you said, right, like there's talent everywhere. I think the good thing about college golf where we are right now, it's, you have your names, but you never know who's going to win in any given week because they're all really, really good. They're all really, really good.
They are. And I think with young guys playing well on the Korn Ferry and then the PGA Tour at such a young age, guys have lifted the barrier or the ceiling off of what they think is possible. And so they believe that they could do that. They're pointing toward that. And as I've always said for a long, long time now, the golf ball has no idea you're at a mid-major or you're a freshman or that you're not highly ranked. It has no idea. It goes where you tell it to go, and that's the way it's always been and the way it always will be. So,
if I can, I want to lump in. You mentioned PGA Tour U, and it's been a benefit. And like you said, it's kind of changed the way people or college kids have approached when they want to turn pro, how they want to turn pro. I like to also lump in NIL and transfer portal all being a part of the same umbrella because I feel like they all kind of work together at this point. Do you have any insights maybe of what all that means for college golf right now? And again, because of where you've been, how that has changed maybe your job from where it was to where it is now. Like how do you manage all of that?
Well, it's very difficult to manage it. It's not like it used to be. It used to be when you raised money, you were raising it for a new short game area, or you were raising it just maybe to travel to Hawaii or whatever. But now you're having to think about, how do I keep this blue chip player that I've got here? How do I keep him happy? How do I keep people from getting in his ear and saying, well, Coach McGraw is not giving you enough money. You need to go someplace else. So that's the not so pure part of it as far as I'm concerned. Mike Dunphy, who works with Cleveland Strix on Golf, Mike used to coach at Alabama, Birmingham, and he had a great quote one time. He said, I miss the days when the practice round at a college golf tournament was played to see who had the rollaway at the hotel that night, because you didn't get 3 hotel rooms, you got 2, and one kid was on a rollaway in one of those 2 rooms. Now, that's not ideal, but it is kind of another time and place in collegiate athletics and certainly collegiate golf when you look back and say, that was the pureness of college golf. You just played because you loved it. And you took advantage of opportunities that were afforded you, but you also didn't take any of that for granted. And you always were grateful for the things that were being done for you. So I think we're kind of losing a little bit of that with NIL being a focus. And unfortunately, I think on some level it de-emphasizes the diploma, because the diploma, even if you don't use it in your working world or in your professional career, if you didn't use it, it still shows you have the ability to start a course of study, go through it, and complete the course of study, beginning to end, alpha to omega, or A to Z, whatever it is. And I think we're de-emphasizing that by saying it's just about the money, and it's just about that part. Sort of bothers me because I think, we've graduated 10 consecutive years. Actually, before me, Greg Priest at Baylor had the last 6 years that he had players. They all graduated in 10 straight years at Baylor. We've graduated 16 years in a row of collegiate athletes. That's an accomplishment to me. Now, we haven't had the best record in college golf, but not very many schools have graduated every player. So I don't want to de-emphasize the diploma. I think that's still very, very important and a great accomplishment for players.
Coach, can I ask you, you mentioned about, people getting in your players' ears. How much of a factor is that for a D1 golf coach?
Well, so it is definitely there. Now, I will say it's probably there only for your elite players in college golf. That's it. And I remember when Ricky Fowler turned pro, he had 2 years of eligibility left. And I remember telling Ricky when I early in his career, when I knew he was going to be one of the best players in college golf, Ricky, I'm never going to hold you back. The moment you've always dreamed of playing the PGA Tour, the moment we both think you're ready, I'm going to pack the bags for you and allow you. I mean, I'm getting you out of here because you need to go chase your dream. And to his credit, he told me before he left, he said, Coach, I know I'm going to turn pro early and I didn't get everything accomplished here that we wanted, but I promise you I'm going to represent Oklahoma State University in the best possible way, and I'm going to wear orange on Sundays. And almost every time Ricky's been playing on a Sunday afternoon on the PGA Tour, he's worn orange, and somebody mentioned Oklahoma State University. So, people were in his ear back in the day. I remember that as very well, but now it's probably more so than has ever been. And to the point I made about Ricky, I don't want to hold any kid back, ever. If a kid's ready to go chase his dream, I'm okay with that. And honestly, not everybody that's been successful in the history of the world has a college degree. I realize that. But I don't want kids making decisions to turn pro when they're not ready. They have no status. It just doesn't make any sense. If you're ready, I mean, Tiger Woods was ready, and he mentioned in an interview at one point, he wishes he had stayed one more year. He was having so much fun in college. So it's like, I don't know how to answer that other than, yes, the elite players have people in their ears like, oh, you could do better or whatever. And I'm thinking, okay, all right, we're just going to, and my job as a coach is to make this experience so good for them that they wouldn't want to leave, but so good for them they're also ready to leave when they are.
The PGA Tour has been there for a long time. That runway from college golf into the PGA Tour is a well-trodden path. But now the transfer portal means that there's this greater mobility for players. What sort of dimension has that added to the computations of a golf coach?
Well, I'm not one of those coaches that says the transfer portal is terrible. I'm not that person. If a kid gets in a bad situation and he's not going to be successful, he's not going to flourish, the portal does allow him a better way of getting to another good spot. So I'm okay with that. The one problem they're missing on the transfer portal is they're not asking the kid, the player to actually meet with the coach and talk about why he wants to leave. So I think there ought to be a mandatory, before he gets his name in the portal, he ought to have a meeting with the coach, an administrator to moderate the meeting, mom and dad and the kid. And they just meet, we just talk. Can we work this out? Can we make it happen here at Baylor? And if you can't, then the coach signs off on it and the kid puts his name in the portal and goes on. But that's conflict resolution, one adult to another adult. It's a great opportunity for a kid to learn how to do that. We are not giving them that opportunity by just allowing them to put their name in the portal and get out of here. So I don't like that part of it. And the third part of is it has created tampering on squads throughout the country. I don't know what it's like in football or basketball, but it actually exists in golf now. And that part's bothersome to me too, that somebody would reach out to somebody who reaches out to somebody else, who reaches out to somebody else, who gets down into the household and talks to the parents and says, if you just get little Jimmy in the portal, then XYZ University will have a spot for him. So I don't like that part. So the two parts I really don't like are the tampering and also the avoidance of some kind of conflict resolution for a player when he could get a great life lesson right there.
Let's talk about a purer time, as you mentioned, in college golf and in golf. Let me say that, and I'm going to go even before Oklahoma State. We're going to go all the way back to kind of your starting coaching in high school golf. Tell me about your experience. And was it junior high as well, if I'm not mistaken? Was it junior high and then high school?
Junior high golf. Well, yeah, when I was a high school coach as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that experience like? I coached a little, again, not at your level, but a little bit of high school golf when I first got out of college. It was some of the most fun I had ever had coaching golf. But also, if I'm not mistaken, like the area in which you were coaching golf was super competitive. Like there was a lot of elite programs that came out of that area. What was that experience like? How did that maybe ready you for your opportunity in college golf?
Well, it was an amazing experience. And honestly, if I'm being honest, in 38 years of coaching, those 9 years as a coach, actually 9 or 10 as a coach in Edmond, Oklahoma as a high school coach, probably were some of the most enjoyable, fond memories I have of coaching. Because one, you didn't recruit, you just got the players you got. Number two, I was a junior golf director at the local golf course there. So I got to see the kids at age 9, 10, 11 start the game. And then I watched them all the way through until they graduated. So I got to know their families very, very well. I house set for them. I, took them to summer tournaments in the summer. So I actually got to know these families really, really well. I love that. And honestly, it was a little unfair because I was coaching 12 months out of the year. Most high school coaches were coaching February 1st to May 10th. And that's when they saw their players. And so I probably had a little bit of a built-in advantage. But I just felt like I wanted to make that state high school championship feel like their U.S. Open, and because most of them weren't going to compete at a high level. and some of them did, but most of them weren't. And just this past November, my 1995 state championship team was inducted into the Edmond Junior Golf Hall of Fame. I went back, played golf, not very well, but I played golf with my team. And it was just unbelievable to see those guys almost 30 years later, and just to see where their lives have gone. And you know what? I have the same experience with the college players because I get to see where their lives go and their careers and their families. But you didn't get to see them when they were 9, 10, 11 years old starting their careers. So I have great memories of being a high school coach.
That emphasis on relationships, it's really interesting you mentioned that there, because, you know, it's something having listened to your podcast for a long time, something that you stress a lot in your college coaching. I've read a quote from you that said the very premise of life is about relationships. I want to know the names of their kids when they have a new baby, when they get a new job. It sounds like that started very early, that building those really meaningful relationships with your players while you were a high school coach.
It did. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was creating a philosophy of what was going to be important to me as a coach. It just was natural to me back then. It was just like, you know, I've seen these kids grow up and now they're going to graduate. And, you know, I ran the junior golf program at Kicking Bird. And what I did when kids would graduate, I would say, do you have any old trophies that you want to donate? And so instead of buying trophies, we always had this stockpile, a huge closet full of old trophies. I would just put new nameplates on them and hand them out at junior golf tournaments and high school tournaments in Edmond. So we recycled that, but it was one way a player who was graduating and going on to college could give back to the program. So I did that. I knew I wanted to keep relationships going for life, and all the people I've ever coached are in my phone. So, you know, I don't contact each one of them every month. That's not possible, but I do talk quite often and text quite often with them. I think relationships are extremely important, and it's the essence of life is like the most important things we have are relationships with people. So why wouldn't it be the same for coaching?
So then after the high school stint, your next call is Mike Holder. Is that correct?
Yes.
This is probably my favorite part in the journey here is anything that has to do with Mike Holder. What was it like taking your first college job with Mike Holder, the day-to-day with Mike Holder there? Because my first start, you know, at a previous job, he was on the NCAA committee. So I'm walking into this NCAA boardroom for a summer meeting. We got Mark Hankins in there, Scott Schroeder at UNF, and Mike Holder. I didn't know who Mike Holder was at the time, but I quickly learned who Mike Holder then was, you know, and what he was all about. Kind of, I mean, a lot of us would agree if you didn't know him that well, intimidating presence, you know, he's that guy. What was that like as your first college job working for Mike Holder?
Well, first of all, he is iconic, an iconic figure in the history of college golf. He was intimidating. And he didn't mean to be all the time, but he was all the time.
Yeah.
But I will tell you this, on the very first day I went to work for him, and I've told this story several times, but I said, Mike, what do I need to do this summer while you're out recruiting? Because only one coach could recruit on the road at the time. He said, I don't know what to tell you to do. I said, well, what should I work on? He says, McGraw, listen, I just want you to know, I'm not going to teach you everything. And I don't even know what to tell you it's going to look like. But I will tell you this, I'm going to cut him off at the knees, and you're going to put your arm around him and make him feel good about being short. And I thought, wow, this could be intense. But what Mike was telling me was he's going to be the bad cop and I'm going to be the good cop. And your job as an assistant coach is to support what I do and what I say while keeping the kid from being broken down to nothing. And he understood his hard edges, and he understood that I could smooth those over. And honestly, that was my job for all those years I was his assistant. But I loved working for him for a couple of reasons. One, he was brilliant. Two, he was incredibly hardworking, relentless recruiter, relentless worker every day, thinking about how to make the program better all the time. So he taught me that. And then he taught me that excellence has nothing to do, or greatness or being the best has nothing to do with being realistic. So he taught me how to get outside of this. Oh, that's not really realistic. We can't do that. He got, how many guys are going to do what he did in the world of college golf going forward? I don't know very many that will ever do it. And he showed me there's ways to get outside these limiting ways of thinking. And honestly, I have to do that with my players all the time. And I think that's one thing you have to do is get them to forget about all the limits and the barriers, break those off and go. He taught me that.
It sounds like he sort of ran his program with a rod of iron, and you were there to be the shoulder to cry on. But what did you learn from Mike Holder about how to make a difference on the golf course during a tournament?
Well, he taught me that just handing a bottle of water and patting him on the butt every 5 or 6 holes is not really coaching. And he had done that for a while when he first started coaching. He just kind of hung out on a few par threes here and there and whatever. He just didn't do much. In fact, he would practice a lot of times while the team was on the golf course. So his early years in coaching, he didn't do much. And then he realized, how am I going to be able to coach a kid in a critical moment late in the national championship if I've not really walked with him? And so he taught me that your fact finding, especially in the fall, you walk with a freshman, you walk with a kid who's never played in a golf tournament, you walk with a kid who's struggling, but you find those kids and then you find out how they think, how they handle good things, how they handle adversity, how they make decisions, and then you have better teaching moments at home once you've seen it on the road. He taught me you can allow a kid, especially early in the fall, let him make a mistake. Taylor Gooch will tell you, when he was a freshman, his very first tournament, he was getting ready to make the dumbest play in the history of college golf, and I was dumbfounded. How in the world is this kid going to do this? And I let him do it because Mike Holder taught me. If he's literally thinking that's the shot to play, and it's impossible to pull off, I need him to see why that's not good. And I had a great teaching moment. Taylor will tell you his moment, his career changed in that moment because we had great conversation afterwards. Wasn't intimidating, but Mike taught me about don't be afraid to confront things as well. And I was sort of a non-confrontational guy, a sweetheart of a guy. I didn't want everybody to love me. And Mike taught me that's not how it's going to work for you. You've got to confront things and don't let them fester. So I could go on for days about the things he taught me that have helped me, but I also could go on for quite a while on the things that he did that I would never do as a coach that he taught me. So two-way.
And then you had a year coaching the Oklahoma State women's team, having spent, how many seasons was it?
Seven as
the assistant to Mike Holder. And then how did that come about? And talk a little bit about the differences.
Well, the way I got to the position to begin with, Amy Weeks, who was our women's head coach, I was the assistant for both programs, and I went to the national championship, and it was interesting because Mike asked me to go to their national championship in 2004. He'd never asked me to go coach with the women at the national championship. I'd always just been with the men pretty much at tournaments. And I went there, and he and Amy kind of wanted to see how I would interact with the girls because they had already pretty much decided if Amy's going to retire, and she did, that I might be a good fit. Well, it turned out I had a great relationship with those girls, had worked with a bunch of them. And so it seemed a natural fit. Loved it. There were two kinds of girls on that golf team that one year I coached. Annie Young and Karin Houdin. Those were two first-team All-Americans. And then there were some other girls who were very talented, good players, but you could tell they weren't interested in playing professional golf. They were getting a degree. So I had the dichotomy of both different kinds, some that are totally committed that I'm going to be a professional golfer, and the others were just enjoying the college golf experience. They were good players, and they did everything they could, and honestly were great students as well. So proud of that. But the difference meaning you've got to figure out which ones really want to play professionally. But coaching is coaching. And so while, yes, there's a lot of differences, and I couldn't coach a woman the same exact way I coached men, the similarities mean, yes, you could on some levels. If you find somebody that's really motivated, you work with them. And if you find a girl that's not as motivated, you find different ways to reach her. The thing I learned that helped my coaching more than anything from that year was men and women are different, and you've got to figure out how to coach them. But also every man on the men's team has to be coached differently as well, because by, number 1 through 10 or whatever how many you have on the team, they all need a little something different. And that's kind of what the women needed, was a little something different, even though coaching at its very base level is pretty much the same.
I do have a short follow-up question. You mentioned, maybe with the women's team, there were a few that obviously wanted to turn pro. The others were enjoying college golf, but knew they weren't going to go much further. Do you find with men's teams that is different? Like, I don't know if this is an ego thing, but do you think most of those guys show up on campus thinking, all right, I got 4 years to figure out how I'm going to play professional golf, and there's not a whole lot of people anymore just enjoying the college experience?
That's a great question, and it's one that I revisit every single recruiting cycle. I don't really want to bring kids on that don't have that dream. If they I could take or leave pro, I want them all believing, even though I know the reality is they're not going to play professional golf, a good majority of them, or if they do, it's not for very long. I want the kid who thinks he's good enough to play the tour. I mean, if you could go back 35 years or however many years to when Zach Robinson was Zach Johnson was a freshman at Drake, do you think anybody really looked at him at that time, even his coach, Jamie Bermel at the time, and said, it's a Hall of Famer, he's going to win 2 majors 15 times, it's happening? But he thought he was. Well, tons of other kids come into college thinking, I'm going to be a professional golfer. And you would be a bad coach if you said, nope, you're not good enough. Let's just figure out how you can be a pretty good member of this team. You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to tell the kid he's not. You want to actually walk beside him as he's chasing his dream. Eventually, the reality will hit him that he's probably not going to play professional golf, but I'm not going to be the one to decide that. I want a kid who comes in thinking he's going to, and if he does all the right things, he can play the PGA Tour. Kevin Doherty has played the PGA Tour and the Korn Ferry Tour. He came in as a 6'1", 122-pound freshman at Oklahoma State with a dream he was going to play professional golf, and I'm looking at him going, how's this going to work? But he always believed he would. And I'll never forget when Ricky Fowler told me, you might want to look at this kid. He's from my hometown. He's a couple of years younger than me. And when I first saw him at the Insurance Youth Classic, he was literally 5'6", 89 pounds. And I texted Ricky and I said, what are you doing? I can't recruit this kid. And he said, don't worry, coach. He's a competitive kid. You will like him. But anyway, I guess what I'm saying is if Kevin Doherty can play professional golf and he's still playing, from where he started, then anybody could get there because he didn't start at a great place, but he's finishing in a much better place than a lot of guys. So you ask the question and I say, I'm only going to try to recruit kids who believe they're going to play the PGA Tour, even though I know not all of them will. And I'm going to walk alongside them in a journey that is headed that direction. And, I'm really proud of Johnny Kiefer, who's now on the Korn Ferry Tour. And, he was a lacrosse player when I first saw him. And I told him that first conversation he came to campus, I said, you're a first-team All-American. You're going to play professional golf. And I don't know if that made a difference, but I believe in you are 4 major words in coaching that you need to have. Mike Krzyzewski once said that, and I've always believed that. So that was a long-winded answer to, I want kids that believe they're going to play professional golf.
It's a great answer.
I mean, you then obviously got the big job at Oklahoma State, and you coached a lot of players who went on to the PGA Tour. And you've said Mike Holder didn't put one single player on the PGA Tour. You've said that about yourself as well. I mean, the list is very impressive. But what was there a quality beyond ball striking and golfing capability that each of those stellar players shared that separated them from the rest?
Okay, I never did this, but had I cut them down the sternum and opened up and looked inside, the DNA says I'm a golfer. And that's the biggest difference. They never doubted they were going to do anything but play professional golf. Now, it didn't mean that they didn't understand that's going to be a challenge or that bump in the road or whatever. But if you cut it open, wide open, inside them, the DNA says I'm a golfer. And that was the difference. A lot of kids don't love the game that way. And if you don't love the game of golf, you're not going to last very long because it's going to beat you down. It just will. So that was one of the biggest differences besides just the sheer talent that they had, that they just believe that's what they do for a living. I play golf.
There's a funny Kobe quote out there where it's about, put all your eggs in, and, don't put all your eggs in one basket. He's like, no, I'm just gonna have more eggs. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just gonna have the same basket. I'm just gonna have more eggs. So yeah, it's that unquestionable belief in like, no, this is what I'm doing. This is who I am.
Yeah, I think Kobe and Michael Jordan, if you read the quotes from them, if you just got a master list of their quotes about how they became basically the best in the game, and I realize not very many people are ever going to achieve that. It's a rare quality. But I'll never forget when Kobe said, lazy people, I don't understand you. I don't speak the same language. I don't want to understand you. It's like, why would I want to understand anything that you as a lazy person exhibit? I don't want that. So that's what you're looking for. And I mentioned Ryan Hibble earlier. I think Ryan does a wonderful job of finding people, sometimes meat and potatoes kids, sometimes a blue chipper, but most of the time just kind of the solid meat and potato kids that are unbelievably competitive. And that's cutting the kid open, opening the sternum and seeing what's inside. And you're going, wow, that kid's got it. Max McGreevy was a perfect example of it. So I'm trying in recruiting to do that, to get past just looking at the rankings or that wonderful golf swing that's on plane or 124 mile an hour club head speed. Those are all wonderful metrics to look at, but you really got to get inside and figure that out. And that part has not changed in coaching. It never will. That'll always be there.
I mean, in your time as head coach at Oklahoma State, you won 30 tournaments. You won the 2006 National Championship. I mean, I think coaches who've won a national championship get asked about that a lot, but you also finished runner-up in 2010. I wanted to ask you about the experience of getting all the way to the championship match and coming up one short. I mean, how you did it twice, I think, as an assistant as well, didn't you?
I did. We had the best team in the country that year. We won the stroke play at Nationals. I think the last, 13 or 14 rounds of that season, we basically were at the top of the leaderboard in every tournament, never left. Peter Uihlein was a first-team All-American. Morgan Hoffman, a first-team All-American. Kevin Twave would eventually the next year be a first-team All-American. We just had a great team. And Augusta State, unheralded, but they had probably one of the most competitive teams I've ever seen. The obvious person would be Patrick Reed, who I think is one of the great competitors of all times. I know he's not a very popular player, but what a competitor. And then Carson Newman and Mitch Kravolich, two guys that nobody ever talks about. But I mean, in a back alley fight, I would not have messed with those two guys. So they had just an unbelievably competitive team. And honestly, not many people know this, but one of their players, Taylor Floyd, was on an IV all night long that year. He had the flu, just was terribly sick. I'm standing on the practice tee watching Trent Whitekiller, one of my players, my 5-man, warming up. And a rules official came over along with Josh and said, hey, we got a little problem. Taylor's out in the car, in the van, on an IV. He's been on an IV all night. He needs about another hour and a half of fluids or he can't play today. So is there anything we could do? And I said, well, can't we just switch the tee times so that he and Trent Whitekiller will play in the last group? And they said, you're willing to do that? I said, absolutely. The last thing I'm going to do is take a forfeited point because he couldn't. I'm not doing that. And when the match ended and Sean Einhaus, Kevin Tway lost his playoff that ended the match where Augusta State won. I mean, Taylor Floyd was tied with Trent Whitekiller on the 17th green. So he showed a lot of courage that day. Another example of competitiveness that they had that year. Crushed me like none other that I've ever had, honestly, because we had the best team and we felt like we should win the national championship and we didn't get it done. And Josh Gregory's team, probably the toughest 5 that I've ever seen. And basically all those guys returned the next year, except for one, maybe Taylor wasn't on the team the next year. And they were just as competitive when they won at Karsten Creek. So my memory of that is kind of bittersweet. I had a great team that I really enjoyed coaching, but we didn't get it done. And that's ultimately what your team is remembered for, right?
How long did it take you to get over it?
We got back from nationals and the next morning I was at the State Junior at Kickingbird Golf Course recruiting. So I guess I never did deal with it. I just went straight back to recruiting. And today I probably would take a day off to take a breath, probably. But I don't know if that's the crazy thing about it. Ben Hogan was trying for his 5th U.S. Open at age 48 at Cherry Hills in 1960 and hit a wedge in the water on the 17th hole, made a bogey, and ended up losing the championship. He said he had a nightmare about that, a dream about that, pretty much every night the rest of his life. So, yes, as a competitor, you never completely get over those things, but you don't let them, they don't cut as deep. This time, I didn't wake up this morning before this interview and thought, believe 2010. Oh, I want to do that. So I know it still hurts because national championships are really hard to win. Ask, anybody. They're not easy to win. It's getting so much more parity. So yeah, it cuts deep, but I'm doesn't affect how I feel about those 5 players that played on that team. I feel just as great about them as I ever have. It was just a tough loss.
Yeah. So you experienced, the highs of the highs at Oklahoma State as the head coach there. Somewhat of a, surprising ending, no longer being the coach there. Again, I'm not trying to zoom through the entire resume here, but chance to coach under J.C. Will, which is awesome dude. So I imagine that was a great experience there. But for where you are now, coaching at Baylor, been there a decent chunk of time now as well. Again, going from the high of the head coach at Oklahoma State to somewhat the journey in between, what's the biggest thing you've taken from that journey to what you're currently doing?
Perspective. I'm still as competitive as I ever was at Oklahoma State. I didn't do a very good job of handling the weight of the expectations or whatever it was at Oklahoma State. And so perspective, I understand what I'm doing is not creating tour players. Nobody is. Even the team that's produced the most PGA Tour players is still not creating tour players. It's not what you're doing. You're creating men that are going to go out and be members of society. That's truly what you're creating, because if you have a guy that goes out and wins the PGA Tour and is a cheater, a liar, a bad person, nobody likes him, nobody wants to be around him, and like, what have you really accomplished there? I want to get guys ready to go and live life and be a productive member of society. That sounds a little corny, but it's true. And so that's perspective I've gained is what I'm really doing. But I'm still trying to develop a program at Baylor that's competitive, that can compete year in and year out at the national championship. And so it hurts when I don't get there. But the other thing about perspective is I don't take it home to my wife, Pam, anymore. And at Oklahoma State, every night she had to hear exactly what happened that day at Oklahoma State in practice, on the team, or at a tournament. I don't do that anymore. She has to ask me about the team because I don't want it intruding on our personal life. So that's part of that perspective is I think I've got a better home life now than I've ever had, because the focus is not being a great golf team. Although I don't feel very good about what we did this fall, and my players don't feel very good about it. So we'll have to figure out ways to, I always believe this, you're one swing away from that great feeling of how to hit a good golf shot. You're just one swing away. Why wouldn't you be one swing away as a team, in a golf tournament? So, but my perspective has changed greatly since I coached at Oklahoma State.
Coach, perspective tends to come with experience, and you've had plenty of that. In more recent times, your podcast, you've been getting presumably a lot of different perspectives. Well, you have been getting a lot of different perspectives, talking to the coaches, the players, the people in the college landscape that you do every week on Better Than I Found It, which is a great listen. How much of those conversations contributed to your growing perspective and fund of new ideas, I suppose?
Well, that's the concept that I'd like to live by as a coach, is always learning, continuous learning. There's a Japanese term called Kaizen, which is continuous self-improvement. I believe that if once you think you know it all and you've got all the answers, then you're stagnant, you stop, everybody passes you. So there's a lot of areas in college golf where I'm not at the forefront, where I probably depend upon my assistant coach to kind of be there at the forefront to help our program be. And Jeremy Alcorn is very much at the forefront. He understands everything about golf technology, about TrackMan, GC Quad, which I understand those things, but I'm not as good as he is at it. But continuous learning and continuous self-improvement is really, really important to me. So I don't think I'm going to ever stop doing that. The day I stop doing that is probably the day I stop coaching, and I'll go do something else, because I just have to try to get better.
And your last book, Better Than I Found It, was largely about your experiences at Oklahoma State. I understand you're working on a new book, Coach. What can you tell us about that?
Thank you for asking. It's probably not going to be. It's probably a couple of years down the road, probably. Content-wise, I probably have about 40% to 50% of the book already. And what I did was, about 3 years ago, I reached out to a little over 100 former players and basically said, we'll call him Jimmy. Jimmy, was there anything about our time together, anything about our player-coach relationship that you thought was impactful, that that you thought changed the trajectory of your life, that changed the trajectory of your career, that was impactful so much so that you think about it today? Anything. Now, if not, that's okay. If it was a little more generic than that, or maybe not as dramatic, but if there was anything. And so of those 100 and so players, probably 65 or 70 gave an essay anywhere from 2 to 3 paragraphs all the way up to 10 pages. And so I've got a great database of information from players that wasn't included in the first book that I think, if woven together properly, could show the importance of mentorship, leadership, coaching, relationship building. It could show all of that in a big way. One with, and by the way, I'm going to have some examples of other players who played for other coaches that have impactful things. So it won't be just me. It'll be other coaches as well. Hopefully the stories are moving. Hopefully the stories kind of clue into the biggest part of what's really, really important about what we're doing. If you think about it, when I think of a player that I'm recruiting and I'm seeing him for the first time, when he sees me walking toward him to watch his group, he thinks of a national championship coach. He thinks of my resume. And that's all I know about him so far, pretty much, is his resume. And maybe what a couple of people have told me. So that changes that day when I see him in action. And then once he's come on campus and we have a conversation, and then once we actually have a player-coach relationship for 4 years, and then once I, shake his hand, give him a big hug as he heads off to college, it's never going to be the same. That same kid that saw Mike McGraw walking toward him the very first time he was walking toward him, that same kid 15 years later, when I'm walking toward him, he doesn't think about my resume. He doesn't think about anything I'm doing as a coach other than that's the man that changed my life. That's the man that impacted me at a really, really important time. And I think Wyndham Clark's a perfect example of that. Wyndham and I have an amazing relationship that'll never. I don't talk to Wyndham every week. I text him occasionally because I wanted to know I'm still watching and I'm still very interested. But that juncture, that 9-month period when Wyndham and I were together at Oklahoma State, his freshman year, I'll never, ever do anything as impressive as a coach, record-wise, Hall of Fame, awards, none of that compares to what Wyndham and I went through that year. So that's what the book is going to be about, is deeper conversations between player and coach that were impactful, that could change the world. And it's not just me, it's other coaches and other players as well. That's kind of what the book's going to be about. I'm going to have to maybe have some help to weave it into a nice narrative that works well, because I'm not a professional at that. The first book I wrote was pretty much on my own.
Coach, just wanted to say thank you very much. I'm a huge fan of Better Than I Found It. I've heard nothing but good things about you from everybody I've spoken to in college golf. So thanks very much for your time for today.
Thank you. Marcus, it's great seeing you again. I hadn't seen you in a while, but
it's been a while. Yeah.
Dan, I look forward to meeting you in person at one point. And I love your questions, were fantastic. I loved being on here today. Thank you all so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time, Mike.